Welcome to my channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and like. The air on Klythe didn't just blow, it slashed. Jackson Creed's lungs burned with every breath, each exhale freezing into brittle clouds that shattered in the ash-filled wind. His suit's HUD flickered red, screaming warnings about a dying power cell, failing oxygen seals, and a core temperature dropping faster than he could curse. "Quiet," he growled, his voice raw, lips cracking in the cold. The storm didn't care. Klythe's blizzards weren't weather, they were predators, and Jackson was bleeding out in their jaws. He'd been out too long. What started as a routine recon for Cortec, scouting a derelict mining rig for lost tech, had gone to hell when the storm hit early. The skimmer's nap system fried in an electromagnetic pulse from Klythe's iron core, leaving him stranded on foot with a fractured leg and a horizon swallowed by gray. His fingers, numb despite the gloves, clawed at the ice as he dragged himself forward. Every step was a knife in his thigh. Every breath stole a little more of him. Jackson's knees buckled. He caught himself on a jagged outcrop, swearing under his breath. The HUD blinked, core temp critical. Shutdown imminent. He let out a dry assent, incident. The words hit him like a slap. He wasn't ready to die here, not like this. He thought of home, Nevada's red dirt under a wide sky, the smell of sagebrush after rain, the rumble of his old hover bike. Then he pictured himself face down in alien snow, a forgotten speck in this frozen hell. "Not today," he muttered, forcing his legs to move. 10 steps. He'd make it to 20. A faint pulse of light flickered through the storm. A beacon. "Shelter," Jackson rasped, his voice barely audible over the wind's howl. The shade came into focus, a dome, half buried in ice, its alloy skin glinting like a lifeline. His vision blurred, but he pushed forward, half crawling, half falling, his broken legs screaming with every inch. He reached the beacon stake, his fingers brushing cold metal. Then everything went black. Inside the dome, Vera Tall's head snapped up. A sharp ping cut through the hum of the thermal unit, a motion sensor tripping within a 50-meter radius. She moved fast, her clawed fingers snatching a pulse carbine from the rack. Her species, the Vren, didn't hesitate. Hesitation meant death on Klythe. She checked the weapons charge, flicked open the dome's outer seal, and stepped into the storm, her silver scales catching the dim light like broken glass. Her thermal visor pinged. A human-shaped heat signature lay face down in the snow, fading fast. Vera's mandibles clicked, a Vren reflex of irritation. "A human out here?" She stood still, her mind running probabilities. His vitals were crashing, another minute, and he'd be gone. Protocol screamed to leave him. Humans were trouble, always had been since Cortex started sniffing around Vren mining territories. But Vera wasn't one for protocol. She holstered her carbine and crossed the ice in 3 long strides. She knelt, rolled the body over. His face was pale, lips blue, frost crusting his stubble. "Idiot," she muttered through her vocal modulator, her voice a low hiss. She grabbed his jacket and hauled him up, her Vren strength making his weight feel like nothing. Half dragging, half carrying, she pulled him into the dome, sealing the door against the storm's scream. Inside, she stripped his gear, jacket, boots, thermal layer. His skin was ice cold, his pulse a faint stutter. "You didn't even die fast," she said, tossing his cracked helmet aside. Vren biology had rules. No contact with outsiders beyond necessity. But necessity was a gray area on Klythe. Jackson's core temp was gone. Only one thing could stabilize him: direct heat transfer. Vren physiology could radiate controlled thermal pulses through skin contact, a survival trick from their volcanic homeworld. But it had to be close. Skin to skin? Vera's mandibles clicked again. "Don't make me regret this, human!" She stripped her outer armor, revealing sleek, silver-scaled skin. Her claws retracted slightly as she pulled an emergency thermal tarp from the wall and slid in beside him. His skin against hers was a shock, cold, clammy, human. Her body reacted instantly, heart rate spiking, a flood of Vren pheromones hitting her bloodstream. Her scales flushed a faint violet. Not now, she thought, clamping down on the reflex. Vren females had a bonding instinct, rare and unpredictable, triggered by prolonged physical contact. It was chemical, primal, and permanent. She wrapped herself tighter around him, the tarp sealing them in. You better live, she growled. Because if I've just bonded to a corpse, I'll drag you back from death to get you myself. The storm raged outside. 2 hearts beat inside, one steady, one faltering. The bond began, though neither knew it yet. Jackson woke to warmth, a heavy, unfamiliar kind that pressed against his chest. His head pounded, his body felt like it had been run over by a freighter. A soft amber glow pulsed from a wall panel, casting shadows across the dome's angular interior. Something was wrong. His chest was tight, not from cold but from something alive, humming softly against him. He shifted, and a sharp hiss froze him. Don't move, a voice said, low and edged with menace. Female, but not human. Jackson turned his head slowly. She was there, silver scales glinting faintly, violet eyes sharp as knives, mandibles twitching. They were nose to nose, pressed together under a shimmering thermal tarp. Her body radiated heat, waves of it rolling off her like a desert road at noon. What the? Jackson started, then stopped. He felt her thigh between his legs, her arm across his chest. Skin to skin? His brain caught up. You are dying, she snapped, her vocal modulator giving her voice a metallic bite. You're alive because of me. Stay still. Why are we? He trailed off, the answer clicking. Her heat was keeping him alive. Okay, he said, keeping his voice steady. I'll stay still. I pulled you from the snow an hour ago, she said. Your gear's junk. Your body temp was gone. You shouldn't have lasted that long. Jackson swallowed, his throat dry as Nevada dust. Yeah, I get that a lot. He glanced around. The dome was Vren tech, sleek, cold, nothing human in its lines. Name's Jackson Creed. You. Verital, she said, her voice clipped. Doesn't matter. Nice to meet you, Vera. Thanks for not letting me freeze. He raised a brow, testing her. Her eyes flicked to his mouth, then away. Her breathing hitched, sharper, uneven. Jackson caught it. Something was off, and it wasn't just the fact that he was cuddling an alien. You okay? He asked, keeping his tone light but probing. Her mandibles twitched. I'm fine. You don't seem fine. He held up a hand, palm out. Not complaining, but is this normal for Vren? Emergency cuddling? Her eyes narrowed to slits. It's heat transfer. Don't make it something it's not. Jackson's lips twitched, a half smile he couldn't help. Right. But it is something else, isn't it? He wasn't dumb. Her body language screamed it, tensed muscles, the faint violet flush on her scales. You've done this before? No, she said, her voice sharp as a blade. Shut up, human. His pulse kicked up, but he kept his cool. Is this gonna be a problem? Vera didn't answer right away. Then tightly. It already is. She pulled back, the motion almost pained, and stood. Her scales caught the light, unashamed and lethal, like a polished blade. Jackson sat up, his strength creeping back. You want to tell me what's going on? No. She turned, grabbing her armor from a rack. You wouldn't understand. I'd rather understand before it bites me in the ass. Jackson stood, shaky but upright, his legs still throbbing but functional. Something happened when you touched me. Vera froze, her claws flexing. Don't ask questions you're not ready for. I'm ready, he said, stepping closer. You saved me. I owe you? But don't lie to me. Her violet eyes blazed. You were freezing. I kept you alive. That's all. Jackson studied her, reading the tension in her frame. You're twitchy because you played nurse? Or because something else kicked in? Her mandibles clicked sharply. You're human. You don't get it. Then explain it. She didn't. A sharp ping cut through the dome, shrill and urgent. Vera moved like lightning, carbine in hand, slamming her palm on a console. The screen flared. Perimeter breach. Multiple signatures. 800 meters out. What is it? Jackson asked, already grabbing his sidearm from the pile of his gear, ignoring the ache in his leg. Scavengers, Vera said, her voice cold as the ice outside. Or worse. Stay here. Like hell. He checked the charge on his pistol, a Cortex standard issue that had seen better days. You dragged me in. I'm not sitting this out. Her eyes flicked to him, assessing, like she was weighing his worth. Then she tossed him a Vren pulse rifle, its grip alien under his fingers. Don't waste the cells. And don't die. I didn't save you just to clean up your corpse. Romantic, Jackson said, flashing a grin as he followed her to the dome's outer seal. The storm had eased, but the air still bit like a rusty knife. Vera's visor lit up with targeting data, her movements precise, predatory. 5 signatures. Fast. Energy weapons. She crouched behind a snowbank, Jackson dropping beside her, his breath fogging in the cold. They're not here for scrap. They're hunting. For you? He asked, scoping the horizon through the rifle's sight. For anyone dumb enough to be out here. Her mandibles twitched. Or they're tracking you. Jackson's jaw tightened. Cortec? Maybe. Or Vren renegades. They don't like humans sniffing around their old mines. A plasma bolt cracked the ice 10 meters out, spitting sparks. Vera moved like a shadow, firing 2 bursts that dropped a figure in the snow. Jackson flanked right, laying down suppressing fire, his legs screaming but holding. The attackers, Vren, their scales dulled by black armor, scattered but didn't break. They were organized, not some ragtag scavengers. A second shot grazed Jackson's shoulder, searing through his jacket like a hot poker. He cursed, rolled, and fired back, tagging one in the chest. The Vren dropped, his armor smoking. Vera swept left, her carbine a blur, dropping another. The remaining 3 closed in, their weapons humming with plasma charge. Jackson's HUD pinged, power cell critical. Perfect, he muttered, slamming in a fresh cell. Vera grabbed his arm, yanking him behind a rock outcrop. You're hit. Barely, he said, checking the burn, wincing as the pain bit deeper. You good? Her scales flushed violet for a split second. Don't distract me. Then don't blush. He shot back, his grin half-pained. She hissed but didn't reply. The attackers regrouped, their shapes barely visible through the swirling ash. Vera's visor flickered. They're circling. They want the dome. For what? Jackson asked, reloading, his fingers stiff in the cold. Data core, she said, her voice low. Old Vren mining logs. Cortec has been after it for months. They think there's pre-war tech buried here, something big. Jackson's gut twisted. His mission had been to scout for exactly that kind of tech. And you're just sitting on it? It's not mine, she snapped. But I'm not letting scavengers take it either. The attackers rushed, a coordinated wave. Jackson and Vera moved as one, no words needed. He fired high, she went low, their shots crossing in a deadly arc. 2 more dropped, their armor sparking in the snow. But the last one got close, too close. A Vren renegade, scales scarred and pitted, lunged at Vera with a plasma blade, its edge glowing red. Jackson didn't think. He tackled the bastard, slamming him into the ice. The blade grazed his ribs, burning like hell, but he held on, driving his fist into the Vren's throat until the renegade went limp, his mandibles twitching once before stilling. Vera pulled him off, her claws digging into his jacket. You're insane, she said, but her eyes held something else, respect, maybe, or something deeper. Learn from the best, Jackson panted, clutching his side, the pain sharp but manageable. Back inside the dome, Vera patched his wound with a Vren medkit, her claws moving with a surgeon's precision. You shouldn't have jumped in, she said, not looking at him, her voice quieter now. You're welcome, Jackson replied, leaning against the wall, the dome's hum a faint comfort against the storm outside. So, what's in that data core that's worth dying for? Her mandibles clicked. You don't need to know. I'm bleeding for it. I think I do. She glared, then sighed, her shoulders loosening slightly. Pre-war Vren tech. Blueprints for a fusion lattice, clean energy, city-sized output. Cortec wants it for their colonies. My people want it buried. In the wrong hands, it's a weapon. Jackson whistled low, the sound rough in his throat. And you're guarding it alone? Not alone, she said, her voice dropping. Not anymore. He felt it then, a pull, not just gratitude or survival instinct, but something deeper, like a current in his veins. Her scales flushed violet again, and he knew she felt it too. What's happening to us? He asked, his voice low, almost afraid of the answer. Vera didn't answer. She stood, turning away, but her hand lingered on his arm, her claws brushing his skin for a moment too long. Get some rest, she said. We're not done yet. The storm broke at dawn, leaving a brittle silence across the ice. Jackson woke to find Vera at the console, her claws tapping commands, her scales duller, like she hadn't slept. He stood, stretching, his ribs and leg protesting but holding. Morning, he said, testing the air between them. She didn't turn. You're lucky. Your vitals stabilized overnight. No permanent damage. Guess I owe my emergency heater, he said, his eyes on her, a half-smile tugging at his lips. Her mandibles twitched. Don't push it. I'm not. He stepped closer, his boots scuffing the dome's floor. But I didn't dream that fight. Or the way you looked at me after. She turned, her violet eyes locking on his, sharp and unyielding. You were hypothermic. I saved you. That's it. But it's not, Jackson said, his voice low, steady. You're acting like I'm radioactive. What's going on? Her claws flexed, a faint scrape against the console. You wouldn't understand. Try me. She exhaled, a sharp hiss through her modulator. Vren bonding reflex. Rare. Triggered by heat transfer, skin contact. It's chemical. Permanent. Jackson's pulse kicked up, his heart thudding against his ribs. Permanent? You're in my blood now, she said, almost a whisper, her eyes flicking away. I can't undo it. He stepped into her space, close enough to feel the heat radiating off her. And if I say I don't want it? Her eyes darkened, a storm brewing in them. Then I suffer. My biology fights itself. I burn out. Hell of a choice, Jackson said, his voice softer, the weight of it settling in his chest. It's not a choice, Vera replied. Not anymore. Before he could respond, the console pinged, a shrill warning cutting through the tension. Vera spun, her claws flying over the keys. The screen lit up, Ariel's signature detected. 10 clicks out. Vren military encryption. Friends of yours? Jackson asked, grabbing his rifle, the pain in his side a dull ache now. No, Vera said, her voice like steel. They're here for the core. And they know I've got a human in my dome. Jackson checked his weapon, his hands steady despite the ache. Then let's make sure they regret it. The skimmer hummed low over the ice, Vera at the controls, Jackson in the co-pilot's seat, his rifle across his lap. The storm was gone, but the air was thick with ash, like breathing through a filter of ash and regret. How close? He asked, his voice cutting through the hum. 5 clicks, she said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. 3 signatures. Vren Spec Ops. They're not scavengers. They're trained. For the core? For me, she said, her mandibles clicking softly. I broke protocol saving you. They'll want to know why. Jackson's jaw tightened, his fingers flexing on the rifle. And when they find out about the bond? They'll kill you, she said, her voice flat, final. Or worse, they'll take you. The skimmer crested a ridge, and the enemy came into view, a sleek Vren dropship, its hull glinting like polished obsidian. 3 figures disembarked, their scales polished to a mirror sheen, weapons drawn, moving with the precision of hunters. Vera killed the engine, and they dropped behind a snowbank. Stay low, she hissed, her carbine ready. Jackson scoped the targets, his heart steady despite the odds. What's the plan? We talk first, Vera said, her voice low, controlled. Then we fight. She stood, carbine lowered but ready, her scales catching the faint light. Operative Tall! She shouted, her voice carrying over the ice. Stand down! One of the Vren stepped forward, his scales a deep crimson, his presence heavy, commanding. Vera Tall, he called, his modulator cold as the wind. You've violated Directive 472. Harboring a human. Surrender the data core, and we might let him live. Jackson stood, rifle up, his leg aching but holding. Not happening. The Crimson Vren's mandibles twitched, a faint sneer in his posture. You're bold for a dead man. Vera's scales flushed violet, just for a moment. He's under my protection. You touch him, you answer to me. The air crackled with tension, thick as the ash in the wind. Jackson's finger hovered over the trigger, his eyes locked on the Vren. Vera's voice dropped to a growl, barely audible over the hum of their weapons. Last chance, Kren? Walk away. Kren laughed, a harsh, metallic sound that echoed across the ice. You've bonded, haven't you? I can smell it. You're compromised, Tall. Jackson's blood ran cold, his grip tightening on the rifle. What's he talking about? Vera didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on Kren. He's talking about war. A plasma bolt cracked the snow between them, spitting sparks and heat. Jackson dove, pulling Vera down with him, his heart pounding as the ice burned where they'd stood. The fight was on. The ice burned where the plasma bolt had struck, a blackened scar steaming in the cold. Jackson's heart hammered as he crouched behind the snowbank, Vera pressed against his side, her carbine humming with a fresh charge. The Vren Spec Ops team fanned out, their polished scales glinting like knives in the dim Klythe light. Kren, the crimson-scaled leader, stood at the center, his mandibles twitching with something like amusement. Jackson's ribs ached from the earlier fight, his leg throbbed, but his grip on the pulse rifle was steady. He wasn't dying here. Not today! Vera's voice was a low growl, barely audible over the wind. They're not here to negotiate. They want the core, and they'll kill us to get it. Jackson scoped the enemy, counting 3, Kren and 2 others, moving with the precision of predators. Then we don't let them. He fired a burst, the pulse rifle's kick jarring his shoulder. The shot clipped one of the Vren, sending him staggering, but Kren didn't flinch. He raised a clawed hand, and the other Vren opened fire, plasma bolts tearing into the snowbank, forcing Jackson and Vera to duck. We can't hold here. Vera hissed, her scales flushing violet again, a flicker of that strange bond pulsing between them. The skimmer's our only shot. Cover me. Jackson nodded, popping up to lay down suppressing fire. The Vren scattered, but Kren stood his ground, his weapon trained on Jackson's position. You're fighting for a traitor, human. Kren called, his modulator dripping with disdain. She's bonded to you. She's worthless now. Jackson's jaw tightened. Keep talking, asshole. Makes it easier to aim. Vera bolted for the skimmer, her movements fluid, almost inhumanly fast. Jackson kept firing, his shots forcing the Vren to take cover. A plasma bolt grazed his arm, searing through his jacket, but he gritted his teeth and held position. Vera reached the skimmer, slamming her palm on the hatch. The engine hummed to life, a low growl cutting through the wind. Jackson, now! She shouted. He sprinted, his fractured leg screaming with every step. A bolt hit the ice behind him, spraying shards that stung his neck. He dove into the skimmer's cargo bay, Vera pulling him in as the hatch sealed. She was already at the controls, her claws flying over the panel. The skimmer lurched, skidding across the ice as plasma fire peppered its hull. They're on us, Jackson said, checking the rear monitor. The Vren dropship was airborne, its sleek form cutting through the ash-filled sky like a shark. Vera's mandibles clicked. Hold on. She banked hard, the skimmer dipping into a narrow ravine, ice walls blurring past. The dropship followed, its weapons locking on. A blast rocked the skimmer, warning lights flaring across the console. Jackson braced himself, his hands gripping the co-pilot's seat. "Can you outrun them?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Not likely," Vera said, her eyes fixed on the controls. "But I can outthink them." She flipped a switch, and the skimmer's rear hatch hissed open, releasing a cloud of decoy flares. The dropship's sensors glitched, its shots going wide. Vera pushed the skimmer into a steep climb, the engine screaming as they cleared the ravine and shot toward a jagged ridge. Jackson watched her, the violet flush on her scales brighter now, her focus razor-sharp. "You're good at this," he said half to himself. "Don't flatter me," she snapped, but there was a flicker of something, pride maybe, in her eyes. The dropship regained its lock, a plasma bolt grazing the skimmer's wing. Vera cursed, banking hard again. "We need to lose them. There's a cave system 2 clicks north. If we can reach it, we might shake them." "Might?" Jackson raised a brow, reloading his rifle. "Best I've got," she said, her voice tight. "Unless you want to jump out and fight them hand to hand." "Tempting," he said, flashing a grin. "But I'll pass." The skimmer screamed over the ice, the cave system looming ahead, a dark maw carved into the side of a cliff. Vera piloted with a precision that made Jackson's chest tighten, not just from adrenaline but from something else. The bond. He could feel it now, a pull in his blood, like her presence was wired into him. It wasn't just her heat saving him anymore. It was her. The skimmer slid into the cave, the darkness swallowing them. Vera killed the lights, switching to thermal imaging. The dropship overshot, its engines roaring as it circled back. Jackson let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Nice move. Don't celebrate yet," Vera said, her claws still on the controls. "They'll scan the caves. We need to move deeper." She guided the skimmer through a labyrinth of ice tunnels, the walls glowing faintly with bioluminescent algae. The air was colder here, heavy with the scent of mineral and frost. Jackson's HUD flickered, struggling to keep up. "This place is a maze," he said, scanning the shadows. "You know it well?" "Too well," Vera said, her voice quieter now. "I hid here as a kid. During the war." Jackson glanced at her, catching the weight in her words. "Vren war? Or ours?" "Both," she said, her mandibles clicking softly. "Cortec bombed our mines. My family was stationed here. I was the only one who made it out." He didn't know what to say to that. "I'm sorry," he managed, the words feeling small. "Don't be," she said, her eyes still on the controls. "It's why I'm here. Guarding the core. Making sure no one else loses what I did." Jackson nodded, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. He wanted to ask more, but a faint hum echoed through the cave, distant, but growing louder. "They're in," he said, checking the monitor. The dropship's thermal signature pulsed at the cave's entrance. Vera's scales flushed violet again, brighter this time. "We can't outrun them forever. We need to make a stand. Then we pick the ground," Jackson said, his voice steady. "Somewhere narrow. Force them to come to us." She glanced at him, her violet eyes sharp. "You think like a Vren." "I'll take that as a compliment," he said, grinning despite the pain in his side. They parked the skimmer in a tight choke point, the cave walls narrowing to a bottleneck. Vera set up trip sensors, their faint glow blending with the algae. Jackson rigged a makeshift explosive from a spare power cell, wedging it into a crevice. "Old Cortec trick," he said, catching her look. "Blows hot enough to melt steel." "You humans," she said, almost a scoff, but her mandibles twitched with something like amusement. They took positions behind a jagged ice shelf, weapons ready. The hum of the dropship grew louder, its lights casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Jackson's pulse was steady, but he felt Vera's presence beside him, her heat a quiet anchor. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. "No," she said, her eyes locked on the tunnel. "But I'm sure about you." The words hit him harder than they should have. Before he could respond, the dropship's hatch opened, and Kren's team stepped out, their scales glinting in the algae's glow. Jackson fired first, a burst that caught one Vren in the shoulder, spinning him into the wall. Vera followed, her carbine dropping another with surgical precision. Kren ducked, his plasma blade igniting, its red glow cutting through the dark. "You can't win, Tal!" Kren shouted, his voice echoing. "You've betrayed your blood. Bonded to a human. You're nothing now." Jackson's grip tightened. "Keep talking, pal. I'm starting to like you less." Vera's scales flushed deeper, her voice a growl. "He's mine, Kren. You touch him, you die." Kren laughed, the sound harsh and metallic. "You're already dead, Tal. You just don't know it." The fight was brutal, fast. Kren charged, his blades slashing through the air. Jackson rolled, firing, but the Vren was too quick, closing the distance. Vera met him head-on, her carbine discarded, claws extended. They collided like a storm, scales against steel, her movements a blur of fury. Jackson triggered the explosive, the blast shaking the cave, sending ice shards raining down. One Vren screamed, caught in the fire, but Kren and Vera kept fighting, locked in a deadly dance. Jackson flanked, his rifle jamming in the cold. He cursed, grabbing a jagged piece of ice and hurling it at Kren's back. It bought Vera a second, enough to drive her claws into Kren's side. He roared, slashing her arm, blood spraying the ice. Jackson tackled him, ignoring the pain in his ribs, and slammed his fist into Kren's mandibles. The Vren staggered, but his blade came up, grazing Jackson's chest. Vera screamed, a raw, primal sound, and launched herself at Kren, knocking him to the ground. She pinned him, her claws at his throat. "Enough," she hissed, her scales blazing violet. Kren's eyes flickered, then went still. He wasn't dead, but he was out. Jackson panted, clutching his chest, blood seeping through his fingers. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough. Vera stood, her arm bleeding, her breath ragged. "No," she said, but her eyes were on him, fierce and unyielding. "But you're alive." "Barely," he said, managing a grin. "You're not getting rid of me that easy." She didn't smile, but her scales softened, the violet fading to silver. "We need to move. They'll send more." They dragged Kren's unconscious body to the skimmer, binding his wrists with Vren cuffs. The other two were dead, their scales dull in the algae's glow. Jackson checked the dropship, disabled, its systems fried from the explosive. "No pursuit for now," he said, climbing into the skimmer's cargo bay. Vera took the controls, her arms still bleeding, but she didn't flinch. "We can't stay in the caves. They'll track us." "Where to?" Jackson asked, wincing as he patched his chest with a medkit. "There's an old Vren outpost 10 clicks west," she said. "Abandoned, but it's got a comm array. We can send a distress signal." "To who?" Jackson asked, raising a brow. "Your people want you dead. Mine probably do too." "Not everyone," she said, her voice low. "There's a Vren resistance. They don't trust Cortec, but they don't follow command either. They'll help." Jackson leaned back, the pain in his chest dulling under the medkit's numbing gel. "Resistance, huh? Sounds like my kind of people. Don't get cocky," she said, but there was a warmth in her tone, faint but there. The skimmer glided through the caves, emerging into a frozen valley under a sky heavy with ash. Jackson watched Vera, her focus unbroken despite the blood on her arm. The bond was stronger now, a hum in his blood he couldn't ignore. He didn't want to. "You meant what you said back there," he said, his voice quiet. "About me being yours." Her mandibles clicked, but she didn't look at him. "Don't make it weird, human." "I'm not," he said, leaning forward. "But I feel it too. You're in my head, Vera. I don't know how, but you are." She glanced at him, her violet eyes softening for a moment. "It's not just your head. It's your blood. The bond, it's rewriting us both." "Rewriting?" Jackson's gut twisted. "What does that mean?" "It means you're not just human anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm not just Vren. We're something else. Before he could press her, the skimmer's sensors pinged. A new signature, human, not Vren. A Cortex shuttle, 3 clicks out, closing fast. Jackson's heart sank. Friends of mine? Doubt it, Vera said, her claws tightening on the controls. Cortex has been watching this sector. They know you're here. Great, Jackson muttered, checking his rifle. Any chance they're just here to say hi? Vera's mandibles twitched. They're here for the core vessel core. And you. The shuttle was closing, its silhouette a dark speck against the ash-filled sky. Vera banked the skimmer toward a narrow pass, the engines straining. We can't fight them, she said. Not in this thing. Then what? Jackson asked, his chest tight. We hide, she said. And we hope your people are as bad at tracking as they are at dying. The skimmer dove into the pass, the shuttle's sensors losing them in the ice walls. Vera landed in a shallow cave, killing the engine. We wait, she said. They'll pass. Jackson watched the monitor, the shuttle's signature fading. You sure about that? No, she admitted, her scales dull in the dim light. But we don't have a choice. They sat in silence, the cave's cold seeping through the skimmer's hull. Jackson's chest ached, but he ignored it, his eyes on Vera. You didn't have to save me, he said quietly. Back in the storm. You could have left me. Her eyes met his, sharp and unreadable. I don't know why I didn't. Yeah, you do, he said, his voice soft but firm. Same reason I tackled that Vren for you. Her mandibles clicked, a soft sound. You're a fool, Jackson Creed. Maybe, he said, smiling faintly. But I'm your fool. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, softly, don't make me regret this. The shuttle's signature reappeared, closer now. Jackson's heart sank. They're back. Vera's claws flew over the console, her voice tight. We can't outrun them. Not with the damage. Then we fight, Jackson said, gripping his rifle. Her eyes locked on his, a storm of emotions behind them. You'll die. Not without you, he said, the words heavier than he meant. The bond pulsed between them, stronger now, a fire in his blood. Vera's scales flushed violet, and for the first time, she didn't look away. The cave's walls shimmered with bioluminescent algae, casting ghostly light across the skimmer's battered hull. Jackson Creed crouched beside Vera tall, his pulse rifle warm in his hands, his chest tight from the wound that still oozed despite the medkit's gel. The Cortex shuttle's signature pulsed on the skimmer's monitor, closer now, a predator circling its prey. Vera's claws tapped the console, her silver scales dull in the dim light, her violet eyes scanning the readouts. The air was heavy with ash and tension, the bond between them humming like a live wire. They're locking on, Vera said, her voice low, her mandibles clicking softly. We've got minutes, maybe less. Jackson checked his rifle's charge, ignoring the ache in his ribs. Then we make them count. You got a plan? Her eyes flicked to him, sharp and fierce. We take the fight to them. The cave's too tight for their shuttle. They'll have to come on foot. Jackson grinned, the kind of reckless grin that had gotten him through a dozen Cortex missions. I like it. Hit them where they're weak. Vera's scales flushed violet, just for a moment. Don't get cocky, human. You're still bleeding. So are you, he said, nodding at the gash on her arm, crusted with dark blood. We're a match set. She didn't smile, but her mandibles twitched, a Vren equivalent. Stay close. The bond, it's stronger now. If you die, it'll hurt me. Jackson's gut twisted. Hurt how? Her voice dropped, almost a whisper. It'll burn me out. My biology's wired to you. If you go, I unravel. He stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Then we both walk out of this. Deal? She held his gaze, her eyes softening. Deal. The monitor pinged, shrill and urgent. The shuttle had landed, its ramp lowering 200 meters out. Jackson and Vera moved fast, slipping out of the skimmer and taking positions behind a jagged ice shelf. The cave's narrow throat would force the Cortec team into a bottleneck, but it also left them with no retreat. Jackson's heart pounded, not from fear but from something fiercer, a need to protect her, to protect this, whatever it was. Footsteps crunched in the snow outside. 4 figures emerged, their exo-armor glinting under the algae's glow. Cortec operatives, armed with plasma rifles, their HUDs scanning the dark. The leader, a woman with a buzzed head and a scar across her cheek, raised a hand. "Creed!" she called, her voice amplified through her helmet. "We know you're in there. Surrender the Vren and the data core, and you walk." Jackson glanced at Vera, her carbine ready, her scales blazing violet. "Friend of yours?" she whispered. "Nope," Jackson said, scoping the leader. "Commander Lyle. Cortec cleanup crew. She's here to tie up loose ends." "Then we cut the strings," Vera said, her voice like steel. Jackson fired first, a pulse that caught one operative in the chest, dropping him hard. Vera followed, her carbine spitting precise bursts, forcing the others to scatter. Lyle ducked behind a stalagmite, returning fire, her plasma bolts searing the ice. The cave shook, shards raining down. Jackson rolled, his legs screaming, and tagged another operative in the knee. The man screamed, collapsing, but Lyle kept advancing, her rifle humming. "She's good," Jackson muttered, reloading. "She's dead," Vera growled, her claws flexing. She lunged from cover, moving like a predator, her carbine dropping the third operative with a headshot. Lyle fired back, a bolt grazing Vera's shoulder, drawing a hiss of pain. Jackson's blood boiled. He broke cover, firing wildly, forcing Lyle back. "Vera, down!" he shouted. She dropped, and Jackson triggered the last of his rigged explosives. The blast rocked the cave, collapsing a section of the ceiling. Ice and rock buried the third operative, but Lyle dove clear, her armor scorched but intact. She stood, her rifle trained on Jackson. "You're a liability, Creed," she said, her voice cold. "Bonded to an alien? Cortec can't let that stand." Vera surged forward, tackling Lyle before she could fire. The 2 women hit the ice, Vera's claws slashing at Lyle's armor, sparks flying. Jackson scrambled to his feet, his rifle jammed, and grabbed a fallen plasma blade. He charged, slashing at Lyle's arm, forcing her to release Vera. The commander rolled, drawing a sidearm, but Vera was faster, pinning her with a knee to the chest. "Yield," Vera hissed, her claws at Lyle's throat. Lyle laughed, blood trickling from her lip. "You're both dead. You just don't know it yet." A new sound cut through the cave, a low, mechanical hum. Jackson's heart sank. "Vera," he said, pointing to the monitor on her wrist. Another signature, Vren this time, closing fast. Kren's backup. Vera's mandibles clicked, her eyes blazing. "We can't fight both." "Then we run," Jackson said, pulling her up. "To the outpost you mentioned. The Calmaray." Lyle laughed again, coughing blood. "You'll never make it." Vera slammed her fist into Lyle's helmet, knocking her out. "Shut up." They dragged Lyle's body to the skimmer, binding her with Vren cuffs alongside Kren. The cave shook again, the Vren dropship's engines echoing closer. Jackson climbed into the co-pilot's seat, his chest tight, blood seeping through his bandages. Vera took the controls, her arm trembling but steady. "Hold on," she said, gunning the engine. The skimmer shot out of the cave, the Vren dropship hot on their tail. Plasma bolts streaked past, scorching the ice. Vera weaved through a frozen canyon, the skimmer's hull groaning under the strain. Jackson checked the monitor, his jaw tight. "They're gaining." "I know," Vera snapped, her scales blazing violet. "The outpost's close." One click. A bolt hit the skimmer's rear, warning lights flaring. Jackson braced himself, his hand brushing Vera's arm. The bond flared, a heat in his blood that steadied him. "You got this," he said, his voice calm. Her eyes flicked to him, softening for a split second. "Don't die on me, human." "Not planning to," he said, managing a grin. The outpost came into view, a crumbling Vren structure, half buried in snow, its calm array a skeletal spire against the ash-filled sky. Vera landed hard, the skimmer skidding across the ice. They scrambled out, dragging Kren and Lyle into the outpost's main chamber. The air was stale, the walls scarred from old battles, but the calm array hummed faintly, still active. Vera knelt at the console, her claws flying over the controls. I'm sending the distress signal. The resistance should pick it up. Jackson guarded the entrance, his rifle trained on the horizon. The Vren dropship landed 500 meters out, its ramp lowering. Company's here, he said, his voice tight. Vera didn't look up. Buy me time. He nodded, stepping into the cold, his breath fogging. 4 Vren operatives emerged, their scales glinting, weapons drawn. Jackson fired, dropping one before they could react. The others scattered, returning fire. Plasma bolts seared the outpost's walls, and Jackson ducked behind a collapsed pillar, his leg buckling but holding. He fired again, tagging another, but the remaining 2 closed in, their movements lethal. Vera's voice crackled through his calm. Signals out. Resistance is 10 minutes away. 10 minutes is a lifetime. Jackson muttered, firing another burst. A bolt grazed his shoulder, burning through his jacket. He cursed, rolling to new cover, his vision blurring from pain. Then Vera was there, her carbine blazing, dropping one of the Vren with a clean shot. The last operative charged, his plasma blade ignited. Jackson tackled him, the impact jarring his wounds, and slammed the butt of his rifle into the Vren's mandibles. The operative staggered, and Vera finished him with a claw to the throat, her scales blazing violet. They collapsed against the pillar, panting, blood mixing with the snow. Jackson's chest heaved, his eyes locked on Vera. You're a hell of a partner, he said, his voice rough. Her mandibles twitched, a faint smile. You're not bad for a human. The bond pulsed between them, stronger now, a fire that burned through the pain. Jackson reached for her hand, his fingers brushing her scales. We're not done yet, are we? No, she said, her voice soft but fierce. Not even close. The resistance arrived in a roar of engines, a battered Vren skiff landing outside the outpost. 3 figures disembarked, 2 Vren, 1 human, their armor patched and scarred. The human, a grizzled man with a cybernetic eye, stepped forward, his rifle lowered. Vera tall? He called. Vera stood, helping Jackson to his feet. Dren, she said, nodding. You're late. Traffic, Dren said, his grin sharp. Heard you bonded with a human. That him? Jackson raised a brow. Jackson Creed. Nice to meet you. Dren studied him, then laughed. You're either brave or stupid, Creed. Maybe both. The Vren resistance secured Kren and Lyle, loading them onto the skiff. Dren turned to Vera. The core's a problem. Corteca's got a fleet inbound. They want it bad. Then we destroy it, Vera said, her voice firm. Jackson frowned. Destroy it? You said it's clean energy. Could change everything. It's a weapon, she said, her eyes hard. In Corteca's hands it'll burn worlds. Dren nodded. She's right. We've seen what it can do. Pre-war Vren used it to glass colonies. You want that on your conscience? Jackson's jaw tightened. No. But I don't want to run forever either. You won't, Vera said, her hand brushing his. We end this now. They moved to the outpost's core chamber, a cavernous room lined with ancient Vren tech. The data core sat on a pedestal, a sleek cylinder pulsing with faint light. Vera rigged it with a plasma charge, her claws steady despite her wounds. Jackson watched, the bond humming in his blood, tying him to her in a way he couldn't explain. You sure about this? He asked, his voice low. No, she admitted, her eyes meeting his. But I'm sure about us. He nodded, his hand finding hers. Then let's finish it. The charge detonated, the core erupting in a flash of light and heat. The chambers shook, ice cracking overhead, but the outpost held. The data was gone, its secrets buried in ash and flame. Jackson and Vera stumbled out, leaning on each other, their blood mixing in the snow. Dren's skiff was waiting, But a new signature appeared on the horizon, a Cortec fleet, 3 ships strong, descending through the ash. Time to go, Vren said, his voice urgent. Jackson looked at Vera, her scales glinting in the faint light. We running or fighting? She smiled, sharp and fierce. We fight. The skiff lifted off, Vren at the controls, Vera and Jackson manning the weapons. The Cortex ships opened fire, plasma bolts lighting the sky. Jackson fired back, his shots precise, taking out a wing on the lead ship. Vera's carbine roared, disabling another. The skiff weaved through the barrage, Vren's piloting a masterclass in chaos. They're too many, Vren shouted, banking hard. We can't take them all. Then we take as many as we can, Jackson said, his voice steady, the bond with Vera afire in his chest. Vera's claws found his hand, squeezing tight. Together, she said. Together, he echoed. The skiff dove, drawing the Cortex ships into a narrow pass. Vren triggered a decoy pulse, scattering their sensors. Jackson and Vera fired in unison, their shots tearing through the lead ship's hull. It spiraled, crashing into the ice, the explosion lighting the valley. The other 2 ships broke off, retreating into the ash. Vren laughed, a wild sound. You 2 are insane. Jackson grinned, his hand still in Vera's. You have no idea. They landed at a resistance safehouse, a hidden bunker carved into Klythe's iron core. Vera's wounds were patched, Jackson's chest bandaged properly. They sat together in the med bay, the bond a quiet hum between them. Vren approached, his cybernetic eye glinting. Cortec is pissed, but they've lost the core. You're safe. For now. What about the bond? Jackson asked, his voice low. Vren law says it's illegal. Vren shrugged. Resistance doesn't care about law. You're one of us now. Vera's mandibles twitched, a faint smile. You're stuck with me, human. Jackson leaned closer, his forehead brushing her scales. Good. I wasn't planning on leaving. She kissed him, a fierce, primal thing that set his blood on fire. The bond flared, no longer just instinct but a promise, a pact forged in blood and ice. The safe house hummed around them, the resistance planning their next move, but for now, Jackson and Vera were enough. Outside, Klythe's storms raged, but they didn't run. They'd faced worse. Together, they'd face anything.